Continuing on, Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, Siman Samech Vav, and we're up to Seif Chet, Daf Kuf Aleph Amud Aleph of the regular Dapei Mishna Berurah. Maran writes, and this is based on a Gemara we've had together on Masechet Brachot, Daf Tet Amud Aleph, 9a, the Gemara there says, it's very important for a person to be Somech Geula Litfilah. What does that mean? Both in Shaharit and in Arvit, when you say Baruch Atah Hashem Ga'al Yisrael, you want to start your Shemona Esrei immediately afterwards. To the degree that the Gemara says, wait a second, how do you say Hashem Sfatai Tiftach Ufi Yagiteilatecha? That's not a part of Tefillah. The Tefillah of Shemona Esrei really starts from Baruch Atah Hashem. Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Adonai Sfatai Tiftach Ufi Yagiteilatecha is a pasuk that we say as preface to our Tefillah. And the Gemara says, well, that's okay, because once it has become the minhag to say it as a preface, as an addition to the tefillah, is ketfilah arichtadami. It's like an elongated tefillah, so it's fine. But you see, it's important not to have any hefsek, any pause in between the bracha of Ga'al Yisrael to the tefillah of Shemona Esrei. To the degree that the Gemara says, Kol hasomech tefillah geula litfilah, if you do Geula litfilah, mesanenin lo et geinam. Tremendous. Muftach lo shehu ben ha'olam haba. You're guaranteed to be a ben olam haba, which is tremendous. It's the Gemara in Daf Dalet. It's tremendous. What is it? What's the zchut of Geula litfilah? We have to discuss this at length. B'ezrat Hashem, right before Pesach, a lot to be said about this. But be that as it may, this halacha makes it really in the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Kuf Yud Aleph, when we are going to be discussing the halachot of Tefillah in the chapter 111 of Shulchan Aruch, we're going to discuss this a little more. But for our purposes, we're learning halachot of Kriyat Shema and the brachot of Kriyat Shema. So for our purposes, can you pause between Ga'al Yisrael and Hashem Sfatai for an important thing? For an important thing, says the Shulchan Aruch, Sarich nismoch geula litfilah velo yafsik. You're supposed to put them mamash together and don't pause in between. Le'achar she'abar Ga'al Yisrael, after you say the bracha of Ga'al Yisrael, you're not supposed to pause at all. Rak im ereo ones, only if you were forced, says the Shulchan Aruch. For instance, the Shulchan Aruch gives you an example in which you're allowed to pause. What's the example? You didn't have tefillin until now. They brought your tefillin. You say, oh, I'm davening without talit and tefillin. And now they brought my tefillin. So do you say God, and you said Baruch Atah Hashem Ga'al Yisrael, oops, tefillin is there. Do you pause and say, well, I'm going to put out my tefillin and then start Shemona Esrei? Or do you say, well, I said Ga'al Yisrael, I have to start Shemona Esrei? What do? No, what do you say? Stop, he says. Say bracha also, or no bracha? So says Shulchan Aruch, right? You stop and you put the tefillin. Shelo yiniach, rakim ereo ones shelo yiniach tefillin v'nizdamnu lo ben geula litfilah. You said Baruch Atah Hashem Ga'al Yisrael. Here is tefillin. Maniach az velo yevarech. You put on the tefillin without bracha. We're just quietly pausing, wrapping the tefillin quickly. Then you start Hashem Sfatai. Ad achar sheitpalil. Until after you daven, and then you put your hand on it, you move it a little bit, and you say bracha. Now, how about talit? Rabbi Avraham, can you put on talit then or not? You said Ga'al Yisrael, they brought your talit. You don't have a talit. Says the Shulchan Aruch, no talit. You don't pause even for that 2 seconds that it takes to put on talit even without bracha. Don't, because talit is not a necessity. Tefillin is a necessity. So that's considered honest, says the Shulchan Aruch, right? So says the Reb Chaim Palaji, right? Reb Chaim Palaji was a tremendous gaon from Turkey. He was the grandson of the famed Rabbi Yosef Hazan, the author of Chikre Lev, Mama, Sefer Geoni, tremendous Sefer. He writes, he says he can't even be meharher b'divrei Torah. He can't even think of divrei Torah in between Ga'al Yisrael and Hashem Sfatai. It has to be right away. It has to be immediate. Now, the Ben Ish Chai writes, and Kaf HaChaim also, that if you have a Hagbaha of Sefer Torah, right? As you're saying Baruch Atah Hashem Ga'al Yisrael, they're doing Hagbaha, right? Can you just pause and look at it for a moment? Says the Ben Ish Chai, no. Mamash, it has to be right away. So you don't even stop for pause for looking at the Sefer Torah, even though you're not saying any words, right? Now, same thing is you said Ga'al Yisrael, and you hear the Shaliach Tzibur says Modi Barachulach, right? You don't pause to say Modim because it's going to be considered a pause. Even that little bit that you're saying is going to be considered a pause. So says the Ben Ish Chai, you don't even bow without saying Modim, because that's a pause too. Even to you just go on with your tefillah. Right? Now, says the Mishna Berurah, Chafetz Chaim writes over here, V'lo yafsik afilu b'shia ba'alma b'nehem. Even waiting without words, you should not pause. She'amar Ga'al Yisrael, when you say Ga'al Yisrael, v'hu chamur me'emtza perek. So that's more important between Ga'al Yisrael and Hashem's Sfatay Tiftach. It's more important than even being in the middle of a chapter of Shema. This is really, really important not to pause. That even if it's someone that you have to respect, your father, your Rebbe comes, you don't pause. God said, you start Hashem's Sfatay Tiftach and no pause in between. Says the Mishna Berurah, unless there is a chashash of sakana. Now, the Ben Ish Chai writes that as you say Ga'al Yisrael, you're supposed to touch your tefillin shel rosh and kiss it, right? Baruch Atah Hashem Ga'al Yisrael, you kiss it. Kaf HaChaim says no. That's by itself is considered a little hefsek. So it says you say Ga'al Yisrael, Hashem sefatay tiftach ufi gitiratecha, then you kiss the tefillin shel rosh. We mentioned that in the recent Sefer of Yaakov Hillel, in Gevurot Ari, he writes that he doesn't even do this Ben Ish Chai or Kaf HaChaim because he feels that the sources, Kabbalistically, sources behind this are not necessarily binding sources of Kabbalah. So therefore, he does not concern himself as much, he writes, with this whole thing altogether. But again, the minhag is like the Ben Ish Chai and the Kaf HaChaim to do it, but remember that there is a discrepancy between the Ben Ish Chai and Kaf HaChaim. Kaf HaChaim says, because of the safek that maybe this is considered a hefsek, wait until you say Hashem Sfatay Tiftach ufi gitiratecha, and then you kiss the tefillin shel rosh to fulfill this Kabbalistic idea of having kissed the tefillin shel rosh. Says the Mishna Berurah, shelo hiniach, this case of a person that didn't have tefillin until he said Ga'al Yisrael, and boom, they brought this tefillin. He couldn't wait for Kriyat Shema until they bring tefillin, because either the time of Shema was passing, or he didn't even know that they're going to bring tefillin for him. He had no hope, really. So either case, says the Mishna Berurah, that's the reason that he said Shema without tefillin, because we know already from what we learned before that you're not supposed to say Shema without tefillin. The Gemara says any person that says Shema without tefillin, it's as if he is testifying a false testimony to himself. Therefore, it's important to say it with the tefillin on. Now, a person that doesn't have tefillin, when Sibur is davening, everyone is davening, and you don't have tefillin, right? Now, Magen Avraham says it's better to stop and not daven and wait until the tefillah of Tzibur finishes, and then borrow a tefillin from somebody and say Kriyat Shema tefillin with them. In other words, the Magen Avraham says better daven beyachid with talit and tefillin than daven b'tzibur without talit and tefillin. That's a big thing the Mishna Berurah brings here, and the Kaf HaChaim agrees with this. But Harav Ovadia says no. Harav Ovadia says there are those who say tefillah betzibur without talit and tefillin is more chashuv, is more important than davening with talit and tefillin biyachid. So in other words, Doron, if I ask you, what happens if you have a choice? You have a choice of davening with tzibur. It's very important davening. The Gemara says in Masechet Brachot, Daf Tet, that the tefillah of a person is only accepted when you daven betzibur. Right? It's a really big comment. So I ask a question. Is it better to daven betzibur without tefillin and talit, because I don't have one? Or is it better for me to wait, miss the tefillah betzibur, and then I will ask from Yehuda, I borrow talit and tefillin, and then I daven b'yachid because I missed the minyan? Which one is better? Magen Avraham says better to daven b'yachid with talit and tefillin. It's so important. This. Right? Now you understand why Shulchan Aruch says this is honest. You didn't have tefillin, you have to put on tefillin. Right? But Havadia says no. There are those who argue. They say tefillah betzibur is more important, more hashuv to daven betzibur, because your tefillah is not going to be accepted if you don't have a zechud of tzibur. Moshe Feinstein holds. No, we're talking about the case that you can't do that, right? Yeah, until you say Shema, you have to say Shema, you're going to miss tefillah betzibur. So Moshe Feinstein holds that davening betzibur is a full-fledged chiyuv derabanan. It's important. So the Maaseh, because of this, Chacham Ovadia paskins that a person that's in that situation, if you know for sure that you're going to have good kavanah, Ovadia says, if you daven b'yachid, you're going to daven with kavanah. You're a person that could have kavanah even when you daven with yachid. Then you should do like Magen Avraham. Wait until they finish the tefillah, borrow the talit and tefillin, and daven b'yachid, like Magen Avraham. But if you know you can't, your mind is going to fly all over the place. You're not going to have kavanah when you daven b'yachid. He says, don't do that. Daven b'tzibur, and then afterwards put talit and tefillin and say Shema again with it. But don't miss tefillah b'tzibur, because your tefillah is not going to be accepted if you don't have real strong kavanah, when you don't have the zchut of tzibur. The Gemara darshans this. The Gemara says, "Hen el kabir velo yim'as, she'en hakadosh baruch hu mo'es b'tfilatan shel rabim." Hashem does not disgrace the tefillah of rabim, even if they didn't have kavanah. There's zechut of tzibur. When you have 10 Jews together, the Shekhinah comes with them. The neshamot affect the every single person's tefillah. So that's a tremendous zechut that you have to daven b'tzibur. So if you don't have the confidence that you're going to daven b'kavanah when you are alone, don't miss tefillah b'tzibur, says Chacham Ovadia. Daven without the talit and tefillin even. Better to do that than daven a broken tefillah with talit and tefillin. What kind of tefillah is that? So it says, therefore, it's better to daven with the tzibur and not wait for talit and tefillin to be borrowed afterwards. Now, how about if a person doesn't have tefillin of Rashi, but he has tefillin of Rabbeinu Tam? In other words, imagine somebody comes to the shul and he doesn't have tefillin. So Rabbi Yosef says, well, I have the Rabbeinu Tam, right, that he's putting on right now. I have Rabbeinu Tam. I could lend you my Rabbeinu Tam until after. So should I put on Rabbeinu Tam and daven with it or not? So Chacham Ovadia is said to have said that you should not miss the tefillah b'tzibur just because you don't have Rashi. He says, put on Rabbeinu Tam and daven with the tzibur. Now you see it's aligned with the psak that we had before. It says, don't wait for it. Put it with the Rabbeinu Tam, without bracha, of course. Rabbeinu Tam you put, and then you daven with the tzibur. Instead of waiting for the tzibur and not being able to daven properly with the people with the tzibur. Says the Mishna Berurah, one more piece over here. Now, tefillin, Mishna Berurah, Chafetz Chaim over here writes, why do you have to put tefillin before Shemona Esrei? What's the big deal, right? What's the big deal of putting tefillin before Shemona Esrei? Tefillin is very important, we know that, right? And the Goyim even says, Vera'u, that all the Goyim are going to see that the name of Hashem is called upon you. Zu tefillin shel rosh, Chazal say. This is the tefillin shel rosh. I'll shortly tell you an amazing story that I just heard about tefillin. But nevertheless, says the Mishna Berurah, that tefillin yesh lahem shayachut lekriyat Shema v'tefillah tefeh mitzitzit, because tefillin is very much connected with Shema and with the tefillin, with Shemona Esrei, with tefillah, more than tzitzit. Now, the Kaf HaChaim explains, so what's the connection of tefillin with tefillah? Why is tefillin so connected that we tell you better to pause between God Israel and Shemona Esrei and put on tefillin? Don't daven Shemona Esrei without tefillin. Well, what's the what kavanah? Gavaldik, you're a big tzaddik, right? But essentially, intrinsically, you are. But intrinsically, what's the connection? You're right? Intrinsically says the Kaf HaChaim, because by tefillah, it said that one of the conditions for the tefillah to be accepted is to accept all Malchut Shamayim. If you accept the yoke of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's kingdom and recognize that I'm the Eved of Hashem, Hashem is my master, it's the acceptance of all Malchut Shamayim, the tefillah will be accepted, right? And that is only when you have put the tefillin, because of what you mentioned, because you put on this on your brain, the Shema Yisrael, and the fact that Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, you put it on your frontal cortex. You say, "There's my thoughts are completely, not controlled, but governed by this parashiyot. I accept Hashem's malchut. My mind, my decisions, and this is in front of my heart to control my desires, right? Emotions, the heart. When you get excited, your heartbeat goes up. When you're depressed, your heartbeat goes down. Heart is the center of emotions, right? Mind is the center of thought process and intellect. My intellect, my emotions, and it's on my arm where I do, right? My actions, all of them are dedicated, subordinated to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is the key for tefillah to be accepted, those things. So therefore, that takes precedence to Gal Israel being connected to tefillah. You have to daven with tefillah. But tzitzit, as important as it is not an obligation that a person should have. It's only when you have a four-cornered garment, that's when you have to have tzitzit. You have to wear a talit katan every day. It's important, very important. You get tremendous schar, but it's not enough. So therefore, it's considered hefsek. You don't want to wear it in between, right? Now, this is one aspect. The second aspect of this is the Shulchan Aruch, we learned, said, V'lo yevarech alehem, that you put on tefillin, but you don't say bracha, right? You just put it quickly and you start the davening. So the Pri Hadash disagrees with this. Rabbi Chizkiah di Silva from Italy, the later at age 20, he came to Eretz Israel and he became a student of Maran Shulchan Aruch's student. In other words, Maran Shulchan Aruch had a Talmid called Maharam Galanti, Rabbi Moshe Galanti. Rabbi Moshe Galanti was the first of the chain of Rishon LeZion. Now Rabbi Tzchak Yosef is Rishon LeZion, right? Prior to that, Rabbi Shlomo Amar, the Moroccan Rav was the Rishon LeZion. And prior to that, Rabbi is a chain. Now it's a political thing as well as being a Talmid Chacham. It's also a government political position. But this is a position that has been around for almost 500 years, 450 years. And it used to be that the biggest Talmid Chacham in Eretz Yisrael would be appointed as the garb that you have with all the gold work on it. It's an old thing. The very first Rishon LeZion was Rabbi Moshe Galanti. The Pri Hadash, when he came from Italy, became a student in Rabbi Moshe Galanti's thing. He's a tremendous gaon. He disagrees with this. He says, no, you do say the bracha. The Kevan the Shari Tefillin says the Chafetz Chaim. Once it's mutar to put on tefillin there, you also could say bracha. It's not considered a hefsek. You say the bracha of tefillin right there and then, right? And Eben Hauser agrees with that, but Derech HaChaim disagrees. Derech HaChaim is the sidur of the Rabbi Yaakov Milisa, aka otherwise known as the Tivot or Chavotat. Tremendous gaon. He disagrees. He says, no, that's not true. Hayadam also. Many poskim they all agree with Shulchan Aruch that you put on tefillin, but you don't say bracha if you're in the middle of Gal Yisrael, between that and Hashem's Sfatai Tiftach. And Chacham Obadiah and Kaf HaChaim also agree with that if you are brought tefillin, they bring tefillin for you in between Shemona Esrei and Gal Yisrael and Shemona Esrei, you put on tefillin, but you don't make a bracha, and that's the halacha l'maaseh for us as well. Last piece of this seif that we're going to study today is that the Mishna Berurah says over here that there's a machloket between Ramah and Shulchan Aruch, between the Sfaradim and Ashkenazim, because Maran writes, and if you have not said Gal Yisrael yet, ve'im at shelo amar Gal Yisrael. Imagine you are saying you're getting to Gal Yisrael, but you haven't said Baruch Atah Hashem Gal Yisrael. You haven't said that yet. And then they bring the tefillin for you. Then you put both talit and tefillin and don't say bracha on them until after tefillah. But you put talit also here. And on that, the Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserles for Ashkenazim, he basically says minhag is not like that. Yesh omrim shekodem Gal Yisrael. If you haven't said Baruch Atah Hashem Gal Yisrael, yevarech ala tefillin. You would say the bracha on tefillin, right? You put it with bracha. Vehachi nahug, and that's the minhag, says the Ramah. So you have a clear machloket between Maran, Shulchan Aruch, and the Ramah, Sfaradim and Ashkenazim. You say bracha on tefillin if it's prior to you saying Baruch Atah Hashem Gal Yisrael. You're saying Shira Hadasha Shebechu Geulim. You haven't gotten to Baruch Atah Hashem Gal Yisrael. You say or not, says the Mishna Berurah in Ot Memchet, Umuchach Medivrei Achronim Dehachi Kai Malan. That's the halacha for Ashkenazim, says the Chafetz Chaim. And Kaf HaChaim says that we paskin like Maran, that we don't say the bracha on tefillin, even, and the Chacham Obadiah says the same thing, even if you haven't said Baruch Atah Hashem Gal Yisrael. And that, as I mentioned, is ground for a machloket, a difference of opinion between the Ashkenazim and Sfaradim. An Ashkenazi person, if he doesn't have tefillin and he gets his hand on a tefillin when he's saying Shira Hadasha, before he says Baruch Atah Hashem Gal Yisrael, he would put on tefillin with bracha. The Sfaradim would put on tefillin without bracha because we're concerned that that's considered hefsek, and you could catch the bracha later on. In other words, after you finish your Shemona Esrei, you put your hand on it, remove it a little bit, you say bracha and tefillin, and you're good to go, because even though that we mentioned you have to say bracha and the mitzvot has to be said prior to doing the mitzvah, but tefillin is a mitzvah, what we call mitzvah memushechet, is a continuous mitzvah. Every second that way is a new mitzvah. Therefore, you could say the bracha afterwards as well. And Be'ezrat Hashem, we will continue this in the days to come.